So a lot of these niche little 3D platformers slash action platformers slash puzzle platformers have been getting remakes as of late. Today we're going to look at the remake for Klanoa that just came out recently. So this game isn't known for their absolute amazing movement like most other platformers in the genre, but they do have a couple of interesting tricks inside the game. So this version actually has two different games inside of it. We're gonna go over and take a look at both of them, but first let's start with the first one, shall we? So straight from the start, you can see that Klanoa moves at a really fast speed for a game like this. Most games in this category tends to keep base movement speed slow to prevent players from falling and making mistakes during puzzles. As for his jumps, they are absolutely gigantic. He jumps about 2/3 of the screen. Now, a higher jump like this would typically be pretty good for most games, but in this game, it actually makes it pretty hard to control most of the time. And this is especially true when the jumps are a set distance. No matter how much pressure you put on it, you're always going to jump the same height no matter what. But you are given a hover of some sort. This hover kind of functions pretty weirdly compared to other ones. For example, once you activate it by pressing and holding the jump button while in the air, you'll see that it pulls you down a little bit and then takes you right back to the same height that you started it. A hover that visually moves you down will mess up your internal calculations, thus making you miss a platform, so a lot more than you actually think you would. Another thing about this hover is that it doesn't keep any sort of velocity that you stored from any previous speeds that you've had. This sort of thing can be both good and bad, but the good part about it is that it guarantees that you'll always know the exact distance that it takes from most of the jumps in the game. And as for the bad, it will make it extremely hard for you to save yourself if you happen to overestimate or underestimate the jump. I can guarantee you that you'll die time and time again due to the weirdness of this hover. Now let's move on to his attacking. He can pick up enemies with his trusty little rings. Once they are in his hand, he has three options from here. First, you can choose to just hold it above you, and it'll kind of work as like an overhead shield, keeping you safe from danger. Next, you can choose to throw them in front or behind you. And something new to the third dimensional switch is that you can throw it in the background and the foreground. Now it can be a little jarring and it gets your brain going just a little bit when you have to do these puzzles with the background and the foreground. And for his last and probably the best option you have out of the three is that you can use it as a double jump. If you press the jump button while holding an enemy, you'll throw it straight down and receive some pretty good height for it actually. Also take into consideration that when you throw it down, that's an active hitbox being sent straight downward. And just like any classic platformer, you can damage boost to get past some sequences faster, although you don't have many invincibility frames, so be very careful when you use this or there's a high chance that you'll die. Now something interesting came with the switch to 3D. The ground in this game now has slopes, and I can't really tell if this is an intentional thing or if it's a mistake, but now you can keep momentum going down slopes. Just take a look at this example here. When you run past the slope, it automatically starts speeding you up and making you move faster. This also applies for going uphill too. You start moving a little bit faster as opposed to going downhill. And when you're sliding, you keep all the momentum of the speed that you were at while sliding. It's actually kind of insane how far you can go with it. This momentum can even be pushed to a further distance when using your double jump right after jumping off of the slope. Just take a look at his speed. So as well as using enemies as a double jump, you also can use enemies as gimmicks. Some of them that you grab will allow you to use different abilities, like floating for example. This one is probably one of the only notable ones in this first game. It just allows you to hover for a short time after picking it up. It's pretty useful. Now that's all the movement this first game has to offer. Let's go into the second game. So they decided to make a pretty big change with this version of the game compared to the last one. Let us go over some of these changes piece by piece. So the biggest and most notable change that you'll notice is that he runs at a much slower speed compared to the previous game. Let's take a look at a side-by-side comparison, that way you can fully grasp the speed change. All the basic movement we went over in the first game is essentially the same in this game. His jumps are just significantly smaller than the previous game, but it's honestly a lot easier to control this way. As for his attacks, his double jump, and his hover, it all functions the same as the previous game. One thing to note though is that his hover is actually slower than it was in the game before. This is due to his general lack of movement speed in this version. To spice up some of the game, they decided to add these little hoverboard sections. A good portion of it can be these little auto-scroller sections, which honestly you can speed it up by holding forward and or slowing it down by holding back. While in this mode, you also still have full range to double jump and to hover. Over time, you'll switch from the auto-scroller into this more free range movement. You have lower ground friction to make it feel like you're on a hoverboard sliding down hills. And they also add these little bouncy pads so that you can bounce around while doing this free movement. Even in a restricted game like this, adding a change of pace can add a lot of value for your consumers, amping up the fun factor by like 10. At times when the game wants you to have fast vertical movement, it'll give it to you by allowing you to chain multiple of the double jumps in one go. Let us go back and look at that little sequence here again one more time, but I'm going to slow it down a little bit. So just go ahead and dissect the movement here. You notice how easy it is to do this movement, right? Unlike the first game, this one amped up the amount of gimmicks you will use while holding enemies. Let's go over them one by one and dissect how they're used. First up, we have these little goomies. They are the little green balls here that's floating right above on the screen. Once you grab them, you're allowed to hold and jump off of them as if you're doing a double jump. These little things are placed like everywhere around the game, and they're awfully fun to mess around with. I recommend doing it. So the hover that I mentioned in the first game, they decided to change how it functions in this game. Once you grab it, you have to mash the button to start flying at a very fast speed. Think of it like playing Tails in Sonic 2. There are also these little rocket grab enemies. This one is pretty easy to use and more for the flash appeal of the game. After grabbing one, it will charge you straight up into the air and you'll start to plummet down at a very fast speed. And the last one, and probably by far the coolest one, is this little thunder enemy. After grabbing this enemy, you can use your double jump and you'll charge up for a short moment, then dash upwards with an active hitbox. They use this enemy for very situational moments in the game, but honestly I think they missed out by not using it more throughout the game. So there you have it, that's all the movement that these two games have to offer. Both games introduce very tight movement, but overall the movement is very simple and thoroughly enjoyable to play. But in all honesty, it's very nice to see this character come back from the depths of the Bandai jail cells. So if you're interested in an easy but slightly challenging game, I recommend that you give this a try. If not, he's gonna get locked back up in jail, and we don't need that again. But if you're enjoying the content that I'm dishing out for you right here, I recommend that you follow this YouTube channel by liking and or subscribing to it. I have plenty of content up ahead and in store for the rest of this year, so be prepared. And remember, always try to have a great day, okay?
your time's done. This will be my dominion. King to a queen, you better pay attention. So have fun, ready or not, here I come. Sands of the hourglass in the setting sun. Kaput, stick a fork in it, your team's cooked.